The Douglas Coleman Show is made possible with support from Seth David Radwell, a recent guest on the program and author of American Schism, How the Two Enlightenments Hold the Secret to Healing Our Nation, released this past July. As Publishers Weekly writes in its recent glowing book life review of American Schism, business executive Radwell's epic debut examines the historical influences that have led to what he sees as the collapse of politics in the United States. Seth Radwell makes the case that the current chasm between the American right and left can be traced back to the 18th century's Age of Enlightenment and the basic tenets of liberty, equality, and reason. American Schism provides a historical perspective that can help us fight today's unreason with reason and bridge current-day divides. American Schism by Seth David Radwell is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. For more information, go to americanschismbook.com.
It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life. From the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Thomas Peschak. Hey, Thomas, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you for having me, Douglas. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for coming on this show. So you're a National Geographic photographer, yeah?
That is correct.
This must be National Geographic Week, because just yesterday I interviewed Ann Williams, who was a retired archaeologist and journalist for National Geographic magazine. She worked there for 30 years. It must be a pretty big organization. How many people work there, do you know?
National Geographic, in terms of the entire sort of organization, it's thousands of people. But on the photographic side, in terms of the number of National Geographic photographers who do most of the stories you see in the magazine, I mean, that's only a few dozen of us around the world. So it's a big organization, but it's actually quite a small group of people who produce a lot of the work you actually see on a daily basis.
Are you freelance?
There's a lot of people behind that as well who help put it all together.
Are you freelance, or do you work for them as an employee?
No. So they, photographers were employees up until, I believe, sort of the early 90s or something like that. And then now there's a group of contract photographers / freelancers who are kind of, loosely linked into the organization, and it is us who tend to propose most of the stories you see in the magazine on a weekly basis. So where we go from story to story, but there's a longer term, relationship with the organization. I mean, I'm in addition to a National Geographic photographer, I'm a National Geographic Explorer and Fellow, which means I'm also involved on the National Geographic Society and the conservation and the storytelling side there as well. So it's so I'm linked in a few different ways.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you the same question I asked her, and that was, how did you get this job?
It's pretty much a calling, and it is sort of the pinnacle of many, many, many years of hard work. I think people see National Geographic and think that's what I want. How do I get it? And then the truth is, there's a lot of legwork building up to that. Look, I come from a marine biology background. So I was a marine biologist, and in the early 2000s I was a PhD student, a graduate student, researching the impacts of poaching on abalone, which are these large endangered sea snails in South Africa's kelp forests. They also occur off California and other places. And the research I was doing, the data was crystal clear. It showed that the populations were declining at an alarming rate, and the species was being pushed close to extinction. But all my appeals and all my data fell on deaf ears. Nobody seemed to care. And fortunately, at the same time, I was also making photographs, not as a professional photographer, and they were basic as anything, but designed to use in my scientific conference presentations and things like that. And over time, they gradually also made their way into popular publications, newspapers and magazines. And much to my surprise, the response was astounding. I mean, the same authorities and the same people with influence who didn't care about the science, they finally took note. And in a few short months, armed with just a handful of photographs, I accomplished more in conservation than I'd been unable to do in years with just scientific data. And that was a real sort of first game-changing moment for me, that I thought, you know what, maybe I can actually achieve more through conservation as a photographer and storyteller than as a scientist with statistics. And this comes from a person who wanted to be a marine biologist since he was 10 years old. Photographer was never, ever, ever on my mind. And back then, it took a few more years. But at the end, I made the leap from scientist to journalist to photographer. And then it's been pretty much exclusive for National Geographic since 2007. So almost 15 years.
Oh, well, that's great. And I think that in today's sort of oversaturated media environment, I think the more pictures you can add to the soup, the better your case and cause is going to be, yeah?
100%. I mean, the language that we speak in terms of how we tell a story is really critical, not only to who we reach, but also to the uptake of that story. I mean, I've been a Nat Geo photographer now for 15 years. And I have made probably more than 1 million photographs in that time. And for my latest book project, Wild Seas, I mean, I spent months, scouring my archives to try to find, and select just 200 images out of 1 million to include in this book. And that was a challenging and tough task because, at the end of the day, they were made on dozens of expeditions to some of the, our planet's wildest and most incredible locations. But I was looking for pictures that stood the test of time and that each told stories. For me, photography is all about telling a story. And my photographs, they tell stories about unique animals. The behavior of great white sharks or manta rays, marine iguanas or dolphins, or they showcase and they, inform and expose us to places like the Galapagos or the Seychelles or the islands around Antarctica. And while each of these images individually tells a story, collectively, they tell the narrative of our planet's, richest and yet also one of the most fragile ecosystems, the ocean. But, apart from that, whether it's in my latest book or in a National Geographic magazine story, these images also tell my own personal story. The transformation from this 10-year-old fish and coral reef obsessed boy who wanted to become a marine biologist, who ended up becoming one, working in these kelp forests, and then later making the leap to National Geographic photographer. So I think my images tell both those stories in parallel. And I think the images and the narrative, they also reveal what life is really like on an assignment for National Geographic. The highs and lows, warts and all, the agony and the ecstasy. What does it actually take to travel to the edges of the world again and again and come back with these iconic photographs you see, in the National Geographic books, in the magazine, or in the Instagram feed? So that's really where that passion for storytelling and conservation comes from. And a project like Wild Seas, that book was really inspired by two emotions. It was inspired by love and by fear. Love for the oceans and this really, heavy fear that future generations will simply not get to experience them the way I have.
Well, that's true. And I think there has been a lot more emphasis in the last 20, 30 years on climate and on climate change and the severity of it. And because there was a lot of people that just said, they didn't believe it, or they thought it was a political leverage tool. But now I think people are starting to take it more seriously, that there is an issue and that we must be a little bit more conscious of what we're doing to the environment. And I think one of the best sort of bellwethers of that is how it's impacting wildlife.
Yeah. The two most significant threats to ocean health and to marine biodiversity right now are overfishing and climate change. And, and to combat both of them requires, significant change to our collective behavior as a species, as a whole. And And photographs for me are one way to try to inspire and to trigger that change. I mean, for example, every time you walk into a restaurant or a supermarket and you are purchasing some seafood, fish or whatever it might be, the power you have is immense. The power to either negatively or positively inflect ocean health is huge, because at the end of the day, you are voting with your wallet. And there's, by educating yourself, there's all these fantastic apps out there, like, Seafood Watch and other scientifically supported apps, where all you have to do is type in the name of the fish and it will tell you, this fish comes from a population that is endangered, or this fish comes from a fishery that damages coral reef and catches sea turtles, or this fish is actually caught locally in sustainable manner. So you are now armed with this knowledge, and you can now, make decisions and decide, I'm not purchasing that fish. And then the restaurant is hard, if the restaurant can't sell the fish, it won't buy it from the wholesaler. And if the wholesaler can't sell it to a restaurant, well, the fisherman won't sell it, and then the fisherman won't catch it. So at the end of the day, there's an incredible amount of power, when it comes to the individual and the consumer. I think when it comes to climate change, it is a little bit harder, because even though I think as the individual you can make changes, you can reduce your carbon footprint, and you can do all those things. But for me, I think the most powerful way to combat climate change as an individual is to elect representatives and politicians who actually know what they're talking about. People who have a decisive agenda to reduce emissions and who champion renewable energy. I think collectively, between the grassroots and the individual, and electing leaders who represent those views, I think those are the only ways to ensure that, our oceans and the wildlife that inhabits them are going to survive another 100 years. And I think, photography and storytelling and filmmaking are really a powerful first sort of spark to get people interested and excited and hopefully more aware.
Well, I agree. I mean, they're not just beautiful pictures. There is a message there that I think is very important that you're sharing with everyone. And hopefully that'll make a difference. I did want to ask you quickly, though, about Antarctica, because I've always been fascinated about scuba diving in that kind of cold water. Did you go diving there when you were there?
I actually spent almost a month there earlier this year. I was doing underwater work out there for an article in National Geographic magazine that actually came out. It's actually out now in the November issue. And specifically, I was looking at the impacts of climate change on the wildlife that lives in the seas off the Antarctic Peninsula, and the things that we can do about it, like proclaiming a new marine reserve and various other things. And I was out there in a wetsuit, free diving with penguins and leopard seals and whales, and the water is below freezing. And I've done a lot of extreme diving in my time, but working in a wetsuit under icebergs with leopard seals in that sort of temperature, that was fairly extreme even for my standards.
Well, how long can you stay in the water that cold? I mean, even with a wetsuit.
Well, look, the reason we were wearing wetsuits is because we were free diving. I mean, if you're scuba diving, you can wear a dry suit. In a dry suit, you maybe have an hour. In a wetsuit, you can maybe do 30 minutes, and then you don't feel your fingers, your feet, or your face.
Yeah.
You get out of the water, then you have a half an hour to 40 minutes where you are in excruciating pain because all the feeling comes back. And then when the feeling comes back, you get back in the water for another half an hour, and then you just repeat that until you can't go on anymore. That's pretty much how you work in Antarctic waters.
That doesn't sound very pleasant. Not at all.
No, look, when you're down there and when you're having all these incredible interactions, you forget. But it's when you get back on the boat and you're withering on the deck and trying to revive your limbs and your body parts. Then that's a bit trickier. But nobody ever said this was going to be easy or pleasant, and it rarely is. It's a passion, it's a calling, and I think a lot of us believe in the stories and believe in what we're doing enough to be uncomfortable. I mean, most people, I get so many requests of people wanting to come on assignment with me and doing this and that. And the reality is most people would last 10 minutes. We are not in 5-star hotels. We are not in comfortable locations. We're pulling 20-hour days. We are tired. We are hungry. We're eating basic food. We're not sleeping well. So there are way easier ways to make a living. And I think, those of us who manage to persevere with this, we're doing this because we are utterly in love with what we do, and B, we truly believe that, maybe just on a small increment, we are making a difference, and that the pain and the suffering and the hardship are all worth it, in the end.
Well, I agree. It's a passion-driven career. It's not something that people are going to do just because they need a paycheck.
Exactly. There's easier ways to get that.
Yeah, you can go work on Wall Street and make a lot of money and not have to dive in freezing cold water. Let me hit one of your talking points on your bio here, and then we got to kind of wrap this up. It says the backstory behind your celebrated photo of a great white shark closely following a marine biologist in a kayak. Tell us the story.
This is a picture that dates back to almost 20 years, to 2003. This was in the early days of my transition from marine biologist to photojournalist. And I was working on great white sharks. And sharks at that stage had really bad PR. I mean, they were still regarded as these evil man-eating monsters. And I kind of made it my job to be their PR agent and to kind of, reveal, their true nature, which is, exactly the opposite of what you see in most, films and things like that. And
Jaws.
Yeah. Have you got it on Google? And so basically, I was working with this group of marine biologists of South Africa, and they had discovered these incredibly, dense concentration of great whites in very shallow water. I mean, 6 foot, right close to some beaches. And people were naturally a little bit freaked out about that, and they wanted to know, what are all these white sharks doing there? And, the researchers had a really hard time because the sharks were either, scared of the boat's engine noise, and they always, rushed away when they were trying to observe them, or they were attracted to the engine noise and they tried to bite the engine. So the scientists were never able to observe natural white shark behavior. And I was with them for weeks and weeks, and then I thought, you know what? Why don't you guys try using sea kayaks to track great white sharks? It's quiet, it's more subtle, maybe that'll work. And because it was my dumb idea, I got to test it out first. So I was in the water in this plastic sea kayak surrounded by these great white sharks, and needless to say, they were pretty disinterested. We could follow them, we could track them, and the moment we'd worked out the scientific methodology, I now wanted to make the ultimate white shark photograph. I wanted to show them in a different and a more calmer light. And the picture that I wanted to make was of the scientist in the sea kayak tracking this white shark across this beautiful bay at the southern tip of Africa. And when I began to make the images, I had this one white shark that decided to do something completely different. It just rose up in the water column right behind the scientist, and it came up, the dorsal fin comes out of the water, and I'm still shooting slide film. So I'm down to the last 3 images, and I hold off, and I'm holding off. And as the white shark's dorsal fin just comes out of the water, the scientist looks behind and looks at the shark, and I shoot these 3 images. And then I end up with this picture that I hadn't intended to make, which is the polar opposite. This picture of this white shark tracking a scientist in their kayak in this beautiful bay. And that image just for some reason connected with people. There was, hundreds of websites debating its authenticity. It kind of, it went viral at a time when things couldn't go viral. There was no social media, but it was one of those images that has transcended. And even now, 20 years later, I still get weekly inquiries about that image. And it kind of was the image that put me on the map as a photographer first, really. And yeah, that's the long-winded backstory on the white shark kayak. And if you're listening to this on the radio, just Google white shark kayak. It will come up, and you'll see what I'm talking about, and all the conspiracy theories around that image, and whether it's real or not, or whether it's a fake, and all those things. And I can guarantee you, it's 100% real, and it's still shot on slide film many, many years ago.
Wow, that's a great story. Thomas, we do have to wrap this up. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Your new book is called Wild Seas, and it's a photographic book, yeah? Photography book? How do you say that?
Indeed.
Photography book, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Is it out now? It's available?
Yes. So published by National Geographic Books. It is. It should be out right now. So, go to your local bookshop. If they don't have it, they can order it. National Geographic distributes well, or you can order it on any of the usual online book ordering websites. Out now, and yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming on and sharing your stories. Best of luck with everything you're doing, and I hope the book does well.
Thank you, Douglas, and I appreciate you having me on. Thank you for your time, and have a lovely rest of the day.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Douglas Coleman's Don't Do a Podcast is a dryly humorous rant about Douglas's pet peeve, the unrelenting torrent of podcasts hitting the web on a constant basis. As technology has put podcasting within the reach of anyone, many wholly unqualified people have taken the plunge. This witty polemic tries to persuade them from broadcasting their drivel using Douglas's brand of sarcastic humor. Now on Amazon, only 99 cents.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of The Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
Hey, this is Ray Powers. Don't touch anything. You've got it right where you need it. Tuned in to the Douglas Coleman Show. You heard me.
Okay, please welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show, Robert French. Hello, Robert. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Douglas. How are you? And thanks for inviting me.
Well, thank you for coming on the show. Your last name is French, but you sound British. Am I correct in assuming that?
You are indeed correct in assuming that. Though I'm Canadian by nationality, and I've lived in Canada for 50 years, but I still have my British accent and my British sense of humor. Apart from that, I'm 100% Canadian.
You've been in Canada for 50 years?
I have indeed, yes.
Wow, your accent is still very strong. What happened? You just retained it.
Apparently your accent kind of gets hardened in your voice in your late teens. So wherever you are in your late teens, that's where your accent comes from.
Okay, so where...
unless you set... Sorry, go on.
No, we've got a bit of a delay on this line. That's why we seem to be talking over each other. We may have to resort to speaking as people used to do on radio, where they say, over! But hopefully we won't have to do that. I was just going to say that, or I was just going to ask, actually, where in Britain did you grow up?
I grew up in London, in the East End of London, which is the poor part of London. Although I was born in Oxford, at the same hospital that Stephen Hawking was born in.
Oh.
But only a couple of years after him, though.
Okay.
But I was brought up in London. And I came to Canada when I was 27.
So I guess it begs the obvious question. Why did you move to Canada?
Well, it was one of those odd things. I worked for a company in Britain, and they paid me a heck of a lot of money, but I hated the job. And I looked for other jobs, but I couldn't find a job at the same sort of money. Then I saw an advert for a job that happened to be in Canada. So I applied for it and got accepted and thought I'd come to Canada for a couple of years. And 50 years later, I'm still here.
Time does fly.
It does.
So is it fairly easy for British citizens to go to Canada or Australia or New Zealand? I guess they're referred to as Commonwealth countries.
Yeah, when I came here, it was very easy. I had a letter of offer from a Canadian company where I went to the Canadian Embassy in London, and next thing I know, I'm in Canada. I think it's a little more difficult now, but it's still pretty easy.
So on your bio, it says that you're a software developer. Was that the job that you went to Canada for?
It was, yes.
Okay.
And I didn't become a writer until I'd written some kind of science fiction short stories when I was 20, but I didn't seriously start writing until I was 59. So that was at the end of my career in the software business.
Are you still doing that, or are you retired from software development?
Oh, I don't do software anymore now. Software changes, the computer industry changes every 18 months, and I would be so out of date now that it would be an embarrassment.
I'm trying to think, if you started that 50 years ago, software was a completely different thing than it is now, yeah?
When I started programming, there were only mainframe computers.
Yeah.
And the computer that I first worked on, I actually wrote the native computer code. There was no languages like BASIC or Java or anything like that. It was, when it comes to computers, in the year that I was born, there were 5 computers in the world, and I believe it was 5, and they were all at Bletchley Park, and highly secret, where they were decoding the German coded the Enigma codes, and Alan Turing.
Alan Turing, yes, I saw that film, and I've read about him. Right.
So I was very early in the computer business. I remember when my parents or neighbors would say, "Oh, you're working now. What do you do?" And I'd say, "I'm a computer programmer." And they'd say, "Oh, what's that?" So it's...
Well, I can remember even in high school taking a computer class, and again, it was all mainframes at that point. Mm-hmm. And we were learning computer languages like Fortran and Cobalt and stuff that I don't think is even used anymore, is it?
No, I don't know. I know that in the year 2000, there was a big opportunity for COBOL programmers to get contract work converting 6-figure dates to 8-figure dates. But I don't know that there are still COBOL programs around anymore.
Oh, all right. That was that Y2K bug that never panned out.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Everybody everybody thought we were going to get set back to 1900.
Yeah. Planes were going to fall out of the sky.
Yeah, I do remember that. That was funny. As we stayed up that night, to do the New Year thing, and we were all looking at the computer going, is it going to blow up at midnight? Is it going to...
Yes, I remember that well.
No, it's funny. So retired from software. Your bio also says turned actor. What have you done acting-wise?
Well, I was always interested in acting, and it was my first love. I wanted to become an actor when I left school, but my parents convinced me that I really should do something that was a real career, and they were very excited about the fact that I love mathematics and I was fascinated by computers. So they were encouraging me in that direction. But I decided that I would take a shot at acting, and I took some classes from a fairly well-known acting coach, And I did a lot of theatre over a 10-year period. I did a couple of movies, but only small parts. But, it was more of doing it for the joy of being on stage, which I love.
Do you do Shakespeare?
I have done Shakespeare, yes. I love Shakespeare. The protagonist in my book, detective called Cal Rogan, he has a master's degree in English and is a Shakespeare nut. And so he's often quoting Shakespeare or has Shakespeare pop into his head as he's doing his work as a detective.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it makes him a little different in some ways.
So who is your favorite Shakespearean actor? Do you have one?
Oh, yes. I love Anthony Hopkins. I think Anthony Hopkins is a brilliant actor, and he's done some wonderful Shakespeare. And, of course, Sir Laurence Olivier is the quintessential British Shakespearean actor. But, of course, he is no longer with us.
No, those are two great actors. I think for me, Olivier obviously is a legend, and I certainly wouldn't put him on anything but the top pedestal. But Richard Burton and maybe Peter O'Toole, I think would be ones that were most interesting for me, particularly Burton.
Yes. Burton was an amazing actor, and he could do so many wonderful things. My strongest memory of Richard Burton isn't as a Shakespearean actor, but in that play that the name eludes me for a moment. He did it with his wife, Elizabeth Taylor. And it was about a warring couple who just detested each other.
Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
That's it, of course, yes. My 77-year-old memory sometimes lets me down.
That was a great, and it was a great movie as well. One of the best movies. Yeah.
It was a fabulous movie, yeah.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your book series. This is, it says 7 so far. Cal Rogan Mysteries, crime thriller about a drug-addicted ex-cop who fights his way from living rough on the streets to a much sought-after PI. Set in Vancouver, Canada. I don't think I've ever been to Vancouver, Canada. And you make a reference about the best and the worst of the city. Explain a little bit what, in your opinion, is the best and the worst of Vancouver.
Well, the best of Vancouver is it is a stunningly beautiful city. With very friendly people. It's very. We have lots of tourists in Vancouver, and it's very common for a Vancouverite to walk up to a tourist who's kind of looking at a map and say, "Oh, can I help you?" So the people in Vancouver are really generally very nice. The worst of Vancouver is the city has not done its best to help with the homeless population and to deal with the drug issues on the streets. There are still far too many people living on the streets and living rough. And a couple of characters in my book are two people who live on the streets who knew my protagonist when he was living on the streets. But it's just terrible. I started the Cal Rogan series. I was doing a consulting job. I was still in the software business, doing a consulting job for a company in the downtown east side of Vancouver, which is the area where the drug deals happen. And in order to get to the office every day, I walked past this alley, and I'd look in the alley, and it would be teeming with drug addicts. Many people sleeping there, drug deals going on, and it was just quite a frightening place. And I had this thought, what would it be like to wake up in an alley like that? And I had a breakfast with my then editor, and I said, can you imagine what it would be like? And she said, that's an interesting thought. Who would be an interesting person to wake up in that alley? And I thought, well, maybe a lawyer would be fun, or a cop. And that's how the whole series came about.
That's very interesting. And you've had enough fodder to go on for 7 books with this, with just that one idea. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Just from the one, obviously there's been many more ideas, and my protagonist no longer lives on the streets, but he's still haunted by his addiction, and there are still times when he wants to run to the solace of heroin. But generally, he manages to stay away from it.
Here's an interesting parallel. Now, I'm a songwriter and have been for years and years, but I've never written any kind of a serious book. I wrote a little comedy thing, but no great novels or anything. With a novelist, with an author, you can come up with one idea like that and just go on and on and on and on with it, right? You put your characters in different situations, they develop, they grow, they change, they move, they do all of this stuff. With a song, it's got to be a complete package in 4 minutes or less. Nobody does a part 2 of a song. At least I've never heard of one. So the whole concept of whatever the idea is for the lyrics, I'm talking about like a pop song. So the lyrical ideas have to be all there and complete in 4 minutes. And I find that very interesting because some people get great ideas for songs, and I'm just wondering, wow, could you do a part 2 and a part 3 of this idea, take it to the next step? Just as an example, like the song Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in the next song...
One of my favorites.
Yeah, in the next song, Eleanor Rigby 2, she goes off and does something else. So now she's cleaning houses. Or, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You could do songs around a theme. You could do a series of songs about the theme of, say, drug addiction or abuse or whatever. But the thought of a protagonist for a series of songs is actually interesting, isn't it?
It's an interesting idea. Nobody's ever done it. Back in the 60s and the early 70s, people were coming up with concept albums where the album was supposed to have this sort of connected theme, although I never really quite got it. I never really got the theme. I mean, even the one that's hailed as the first concept album, Sgt. Pepper, speaking of the Beatles.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah.
The songs really aren't connected. And even John, in an interview, said so. He said you could take each one of those songs and put them on any Beatles album, and there's nothing connecting that album other than the beginning and the reprise at the end, which is the same song. And he said it was just, he almost was saying it was sort of a bullshit idea that let's just reprise the thing and then it connects. But all the songs in the middle have nothing to do with each other, which is true because Paul wrote half of them, John wrote half of them. They're completely different. They were not related at all. So for somebody to actually do that, though, I think would be an interesting task to really make an album that had like one theme that would go through the whole album.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. And I'm trying to search my memory for whether that's happened in the world of jazz. Has anyone put together an album on a theme? I'm not sure.
I suppose yes and no. I mean, if you want to get into musical theory themes, like, okay, it's all based on this chord progression, then maybe yes. And then people have done songbook series, like Ella Fitzgerald did the Cole Porter songbook, and the theme was all the songs were written by Cole Porter. So, there's been bits of that, but I don't know. Oh, we could have just started a whole new corporation with this.
Yeah, well, Douglas has a job for you. Go write some songs on a theme.
I'm trying to think how I would sell it. There would be a daunting task to try to sell that. But well, anyways, let's get back to yours. So, okay, Cal Rogan Mysteries. So the book number 7 is out at this point. It's been released.
It is, yeah. It was released a week or so ago.
Oh, all right, good. And the series is doing well generally.
It is, yeah. I've got some very dedicated fans. I started an email list a few years ago, and I've got 6,000 people on that list now. And some of them are really dedicated fans. I listened to one of your other podcasts with Mark Leslie Lefebvre.
Oh, yeah.
And he was talking about the validation of having a publisher publish you. And I can't imagine better validation, though, than the validation I get from emails. When I put out an email or I release a new book, I get hundreds of emails back from people who are on my email list saying that they love the book. And for me, that would surpass any validation that I would get from a publisher saying, yes, I want to publish your book.
Okay. Well, I understand.
It's like when you perform in a play and the audience cheers. You get that feedback from people that you're doing it for.
Exactly. On the other hand, it's nice to get a paycheck as well, because all of that applause and adoration isn't going to pay the rent. So I think there's two ways to look at that.
Well, that's true.
If you need the money, if you're the starving artist, then having a publisher call and say, yes, we're going to write you a nice big advance for your book. But I think both are as important. I think, and then once you've established yourself as a successful author and the money isn't an issue anymore, then the fan adoration, I think, would be even more important, because you would need the validation of, am I still up to snuff? Am I still doing as well as I did and really working hard trying to create the best possible book I can create? Or am I just knocking off another one to get the check because I'm a famous name now? And I think people who have any sort of integrity would question that on a regular basis, because it'd be easy for Stephen King or somebody like that to just knock off another one and do it sort of half-heartedly, and because his name's on it, he knows he'll get a lot of money for it. The publisher doesn't care because they know they'll get a lot of money for it. But is it really any good? And only the fans will tell you that.
Well, that's right. I mean, there were authors that I've followed in the past who basically started phoning in their stuff, and I just stopped reading them.
Wow, no, that is lazy. Yeah.
Yeah, it is, and I've made a written commitment to the people who read my books that I will try to make every book better than the previous one. And I actually did a survey of some of my readers on the latest book, and over 50% of them said, yes, this is better than the previous books. So,
that's great.
The issue of traditional versus indie publishing, when I started, I would have been overjoyed to get a publisher come and speak to me and say, yes, we'll give you an advance. But if a publisher came to me now and said, we want to publish your books in the traditional way, unless they were putting huge amounts of money on the table, I would almost certainly refuse them.
Well, you've established yourself very well as an indie published author, yeah?
Yeah. And there's in your conversation with Mark Leslie Lefebvre, he points out that an indie author gets 70% of the price of the book every time it's sold, whereas a traditional author gets maybe 8 to 10%.
It's a big disparity there, a big gap. It's the same with musicians. If you're working for a major label, you get a fraction of what you would get if you were an indie music artist. You know, the difference is that the music labels have the distribution locked up, where the traditional publishers, the big five, I mean, I know people that are signed with them, and they still have to go out and do their own marketing. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know how wonderful the marketing machine is that the big five publishers still have or not, if the internet has really destroyed their hold on that. They used to. They used to have all of the bookstores wrapped up, and you know, they'd send you off on a book tour and pay for the whole thing. Now I don't think they do. I think you've got to do it yourself.
Yeah, I think that, and I don't know this, but it's a guess that I would think with COVID, a number of people have finally converted from paper books to e-books.
Yeah.
Not wanting to walk into bookstores anymore. And bookstores are changing as well. There's a big chain of bookstores in Canada called Chapters. They're the biggest in Canada. But you walk into a Chapters, and about a third of what they sell is actually books. So,
what's the rest of it that they're selling?
Well, they sell greetings cards and cushions and all sorts of odds and ends.
That's funny.
Where are the books? Where are the books?
Underwear and lingerie in the back. Yeah.
Not quite, but they're moving in that direction.
Oh, that's funny. Well, Robert, we do have to wind this down. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yeah, I do. It's robertpfrench.com.
Okay, and there's links to purchase your books there and social media links.
Somebody can search Amazon for Robert P. French, and they'll find all my books.
Okay.
Which are also in although it's mainly Kindle, they're also in paperback and large print paperback.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was nice meeting you and nice speaking with you. Best of luck with the books. They sound like they're doing well. You said 7 so far. Do you have an anticipated number of these, or are they just going to go on forever?
I'm just going to keep on and on and on. To somewhat paraphrase, I'm going to keep writing until they have to pry my laptop out of my cold, dead hand. It's paraphrasing Charlton Heston and the gun.
Yes. Okay. Well, best of luck. And hopefully you have time to buy a new laptop at some point.
Yes. Thank you very much. Really nice talking to you. I enjoyed it a lot.
Okay. Take care, Robert. Bye-bye.